All right, ladies and gentlemen. So now that Napoleon is all dead and buried, our next goal here will be to look at the Industrial Revolution economics that'll take place in Europe and how a big economic change happens over time throughout 19th century Europe. We're going to have two economic revolutions. We're going to have the first and second, one happening in the early part of the 19th century, the other happening in the second part of the 19th century. So let's take our first looking at what are the keys to industrialization. And so as of right now, really a lot of our countries aren't that industrial, I'd argue. A lot of countries are still based on agriculture and farming. There's some industrial practice with the putting out system, the cottage industry, which we'll look at a little more detail in class. But really, we got to think about what's changing, okay? What do you need? Now, number one thing you need for industrialization is going to be a raw material, right? So where that kind of stuff is. It could be the cloth, it could be the trees, it could be whatever. So one is going to be your raw material. You got to have that to make stuff. Number two is probably going to be your labor force, right? You got to have, some people make these materials, okay? You have people that make it, so it goes. Now, the only problem with having a labor force and materials is great, but you also need money or entrepreneurs to make that process happen. You invest the money to start the process to get things going. So that's three, okay? So far we got raw materials, that labor force, we got entrepreneurs, and very lastly, we're also going to need a market, okay? Markets will be really important too because you make stuff, you got to sell stuff too. The last thing I would put in here might also be the idea of logistics. We're going to need infrastructure to make this kind of stuff happen as well, make transportation, trade, and stuff a lot easier. So a lot of keys to industrialization to take place, and we're going to see how they fit in Europe. Now, we're going to divide Europe into two parts now. We'll look at the UK, the United Kingdom is one part, and the continental Europe as the other part. We're going to start with the UK because Britain is the first to industrialize. And the question is, why? Well, let's do a lot of things. The biggest things is geography, okay? Number one is that it is all by its lonesome, it's by itself, and it has kind of a self-contained area. It has a lot of sea coast, so you're able to trade, all that kind of stuff. You have a really good supply of coal and iron. So you have the natural resource you need for industrialization. You need coal, you need iron, you need all that kind of stuff to make metal devices. So boom, right away we got the raw materials, right? They have investment. The Bank of England is a good bank. They're known for loaning money. You have a lot of young people who are willing to invest their money, especially from that gentry class. Kind of that, they're rich but not knowable. They're kind of in the middle. You have a lot of guys who are second sons who maybe aren't getting the land and all that kind of stuff. So their way to make money is going to be to invest in companies. Also, the insurance companies are a very popular thing in Britain, so that you kind of have that fallback point that you can invest your money and then have some kind of fallback to help you out. Napoleon and his continental system kind of helped here too a little bit because while Napoleon on the continent for the last 15 years had been restricting trade, England had free trade. It really encouraged people to trade with other people, that kind of stuff, and to bring in those materials. And lastly, the Navy played a big role too. The Navy, a British Navy of the 19th century, is the biggest Navy in the world, most powerful Navy in the world. And so they can protect the sea lanes and shipping lanes, help England out. And so there's a lot of big things happening here. Now, the first good that really starts things going is going to be cotton. Okay, the fabric of our lives. Prior to this, they'd always used wool or linen, flax, that kind of thing. Now, obviously, in a nice warm climate or a cold climate, wool is great, keeps you warm. Downside of wool is that it is really, really itchy. Not good, not very comfortable. And when it gets summertime, then it gets too hot and you roast and sweat certain parts of your body off. Now, the other option would be cotton. Cotton breathes better, cotton's lighter. And it's better for undergarments, lighter clothing, all that kind of stuff. And so the cotton revolution is a big deal. Now, those who know, wool comes from sheep, obviously. Linen comes from flax, a plant, and cotton all comes from a plant. Now, the problem with cotton is that cotton does not grow in England, right? You need to use in the colonies. So there's slavery in the colonies, essentially, to make raw materials. Now, they used to be, the Americas don't have them anymore. So instead, Egypt and India are now going to be the main place for building cotton. Egyptian cotton was very famous for its quality, all that kind of stuff. There are people want so much of this cotton cloth, the putting out system with little, the cottage industry, right? Can't keep up with the with the demand. And so people started inventing machinery to help us out. We're going all the way back to the 18th century for this, okay? John Kay made his first fly shuttle, essentially a weaving machine, to make weaving go a lot faster. Doing it by hand, you use a machine for it. Water frames come next. So water frames are built off a water wheel, okay? Richard Arkwright did this, where he essentially made the looms run on a water wheel, and that way factories were started inventing. And then you have Samuel Cotton do the exact same thing, running a water wheel again with his spinning mule, which would have then spin the thread. All great ideas, all cool stuff. But you're kind of limited, right? Your factories must be on water, must be on a river. Limits a lot of what you can do. The other part of the revolution, then, we see early on, starts with your entrepreneurs. Now, you have a large, highly educated population in Britain. So the universities, right? You have a lot of people whose goal is to get rich, right? And so your goal is to rise up to get an idea of ability. So you have a lot of highly motivated people with tech skills. You have that young man in the gentry class with a boatload of cash who are trying to make money. And they want to find ways to get themselves into that next level. And so that's one thing, is that these guys want to, have a goal to kind of get higher up in society. They have a goal to become, make a name for themselves. And you can't do it through land anymore. So business is a way to go. Now, Max Weber, we talked about him earlier, would argue differently. It's that idea of process work ethic. You have a lot of Calvinists in England and certain parts of Europe, and that it's that whole idea of the process work ethic that is going to make you rich. And so you have two different sides, kind of what's happening here. Top it off, the government of England did a lot of things to kind of help industry along as well. It didn't want to limit that middle class. So in monarchical states, early France, Russia, Prussia, etc., you saw a limiting of that middle class. So they don't kind of rise up and force out the monarch, i.e. what happens in the French Revolution, right? Third estate. And so a lot of times they'll limit what's happening there. The government is sympathetic, okay? And obviously, with that limited monarchy, they really don't care. It's not a big deal. The House of Commons is running everything, and that's made up of that middle class. So they're cool with that, all right? And, they didn't try to keep that feudal system in line. They're willing to make things move and change a little bit to give more power to his entrepreneurs. Top it off, the British government is one of the few stable governments in Europe right now. France, crap show, right? Prussia, okay, but there's problems. Russia has all kinds of revolts, all kinds of stuff. Austria is iffy at best. Italy's still fragmented. The only place with a real stable government is Britain. You could not have said that 200 years prior. And so, top it off, Britain really benefited. While the British Army was fighting in the Napoleonic Wars, there was no fighting in England. Napoleon didn't leave the continent and go over to Great Britain. So everything in England is good. All right. Nothing's destroyed. The fields have not been destroyed or destroyed, all that kind of stuff. Not like Russia where you burned everything down. Right. So that's good. That's awesome. And even legislation wise, they start making laws that help out investors. The Bubble Act, okay, which had lessened how much you could invest in companies, create those bubbles that then burst and had economic problems, right? Was repealed by Congress, by Parliament, which now means you had more joint stock companies and start putting investors into large corporations. The Lowe's Act limited liability of owners on their products and other people. The Navigation Act got repealed. So now instead of being a very strict mercantilist society, England is now less mercantilist and allows free trade with all different colonies. And top off, repeal the Corn Laws. The Corn Laws is a grain tariff, so people would buy British wheat. And so they got rid of that, so more people would trade with them, then extend the market. Now, what happens with tariffs is that if you slap a tariff on somebody's goods, they're probably going to slap a tariff back on your goods. Nobody's going to buy your stuff either, which is great when you're, in your own country and you want to support that. But then the problem is you don't really get much trade outside of your country. And so if they start bringing off the tariffs on grain, to Britain, because they had put these corn laws on them and stuff. We'll talk about it later on, okay? The corn laws were used grain tariffs to help support British agriculture. It's going to really help, make things a lot easier for companies to sell things overseas. And the question is, how successful were they? Well, by 1790, you're producing 10 times as much cloth as 1770. And so huge strides happen here. half that world's cloth, especially cotton, is being made by Britain. Now, as you get more and more goods out there, laws of supply and demand tell us that the price should go down, which then makes cotton cloth available to all the classes and the masses. What started changing things was the idea of steam power. Now, before this, all factories were powered by water, which meant you always had to have your factory on a river, so it kind of limited where you could put stuff. Britain did have a problem natural resource-wise. We know that Britain had been, occupied for a long, long time by people and by civilization, all that kind of stuff. And so they didn't have a lot of fuel around. And Europe in itself had kind of a wood shortage. Now, you'd use wood to make charcoal to make iron, all that kind of fun stuff and fuel things. Not a lot of wood. Now, you could use coal, probably start digging coal mines that fill with water, you couldn't pump it out. And so that's why you need a steam engine. Now, the steam engine had been invented in the early 18th century, actually, very rudimentary steam engines that worked, but, not great, right? James Watt, famous guy, revolutionized that engine in 1769. And Richard Arkwright started using the steam engines in exchange of his factories. And it's basically the same idea, right? You hit a water wheel, in the water, it turns a piston, or it turns a flywheel. Same deal. You run a steam engine with a piston, turns a flywheel, the exact same thing. And so now those factories are being powered by steam power instead of by water. Cool, great. You still have the fuel problem, but that's when James Watt started using locomotives and trains in the coal mines. You could use the steam engine to pump the water out. Use a piston, pumps out the water of the coal mine, and then those locomotives and trains would be able to haul the coal out from the deep. So it's kind of cool. You start trying these driven looms and stuff. And the steam was really hard because it moved too fast sometimes. So like Edmund Cartwright made this power-driven loom that was not really flaw-free until the 1800s. It didn't really work too well. It kind of didn't make good quality cloth. We're going to see that kind of proves cheap crap, right? But as we start using the steam power, we start producing more and more coal, which then allows more production of iron, that kind of stuff. And England's producing 2/3 of the world coal by 1850. England is truly the world power of economics prior to the late 19th century. With the iron industry, right, changes well. You need iron to build steam engines, all that kind of stuff. And you start using coke versus charcoal in the production. Now, coke is mined out of the ground, coal, all right. It burns nice and hot, but it's cheaper than charcoal. You're not using wood. And so you'll use it to heat up your slag, heat up your iron ore, and make your iron. Right up here, this is called a puddling furnace right here. And a puddling furnace would help you take off the impurities in the iron. You just puddle the iron out. You would kind of sift off kind of swift off the top all the impurities of the iron and make a lot more iron that way and refine things a lot faster and try to use other methodologies. You have rolling mills that get created. That way you can make your iron, put it in hot, make it in any kind of shape you want to. And so now we have England not only doing the cloth production, they're doing the coal production, they're doing the iron production as well. They're running everything at this point. And top off, you got to change transportation then too. One thing they do is they built a series of canals throughout the England. That way they can link up all these different industries. So railroads, steel, coal. You can get goods where you gotta get goods to. You can get steel and iron to where you gotta get goods to. Get coal moved where you gotta get goods to. They'll start making hard surface roads. Before this, roads were always dirt roads, and which are fine. They work, but the only problem is that dirt roads get muddy with the rain. So you invented, the idea of using blacktop or a type of coating on the surface. That way, water runs off, makes travel easier. You have steam ships. They start creating. So obviously it's an American invention, the Claremont, but across the Atlantic, and Britain started stealing the idea. You have steam wagons, or essentially steam-powered cars, if you will, by 1803 on the London streets. And here you have your first ever locomotive right down here in 1825. So it's kind of cool to kind of see how you invent all these different ideas. You have the first passenger railroad, if you will, by 1830 called a rocket. It moves 60 miles an hour, right? What's cool about this infrastructure transportation is that it'll lower your shipping costs, okay? And you create a larger market. And kind of the first ever commuter where you can travel now and find work and go to different places and really interconnect parts of England. Now, we see this starting in England a lot earlier, right? Late 1700s. You're not going to see the continent do that until after 1850. And the big why is that short man we buried the other day, Napoleon Bonaparte. Actually, not that short, but still, whatever. is that the biggest issue is that first off, we have disruption of trade with the continental system that was being used on the continent, trying to keep trade out from Britain. Ideas weren't going that way. Okay. The other part is that Britain had all technology and would not give it up. Britain had passed laws that said they could not share technology with anybody, whether it be the United States, their continent, or whoever, and with their technology would not get out. They clamped down that stuff pretty hardcore. The United States ends up stealing a lot of technology, start their own steam engines, that kind of thing. And also looking at education-wise, some of the stuff they were doing was way too advanced. So they didn't get it yet. And to invest was very cost effective. And looking at all these countries on how far they are in debt, how much money problems they're having, like Prussia and Russia and France, there's no money out there, right? Revolutions and wars, destruction of fields, all kind of stuff has stopped that. So that kind of hurts there too. Lastly, we have the shortage of workers. Everyone's fighting. Okay, it's Napoleonic Wars, right? You have massive armies marching across Europe. Nobody's around to work in a factory. And so people are kind of stuck that way as well. And the government doesn't care, about industry. They're worried about Napoleon. They're worried about making things work, worried about farming, all that kind of stuff. They worry about keeping monarchs in charge. That's what it's all about here, okay? And so really Europe doesn't do much until, much later. They do catch up, though, okay? Every country is a little different. Looking at some of the countries we have after the Congress of Europe, so Belgium, Holland, and France actually industrialized a lot earlier than 1820s or so, with Germany following in 1850s. And honestly, by 1900, on the eve of the First World War, Germany is your most industrialized company. The biggest thing they do is they just go steal British technology. And that's how they roll. And they just go steal British stuff. They send people over there, look at it, reverse engineer it, and figure out how to make things work, whether it be steam engines or railroads, whatever it is. And so here we got some different things that go down here. We have Belgium that has a lot of big corporations that have stockholders and that kind of stuff, and a lot of money being dumped in the companies. You develop the industrial banks, so banks that are made just for commercial interests and not for individual interests, that kind of thing. You have France and Germany really fund the roads, a heavy industry. We'll talk about the credit mobilier scandal later on, but that was also a big part of France. And so a lot of big banking thing happens in the continent to really shove a lot of money into this program. The other thing is they do a lot of policies. What they do is they do a protectionist policy on their goods by putting high tariffs on British goods. So France early on just got slammed by cheap British goods. Just got hit hard by that. And so what France did is they kind of did a buy French movement where they, put huge tariffs on British goods and vice versa. So we're buying goods in France, right, trying to make them cheaper that way. The German states did too with the Zollverein tariff. Essentially, they made a German trade confederacy, if you will, of a series of German states, including Prussia, Austria, that kind of stuff, where they made a free trade zone within the German states. So kind of like a NAFTA type thing, right? The German states could trade the German states, and that was okay, all right? But let's say we went to France, went to Russia, went to Britain, then there were huge tariffs on outside goods, and you couldn't bring those outside goods into those German states. And so they really try to protect what they were doing. The big point here, right? Big overarching things. We now have a lot more goods available. We're making cloth, making machines, making all that kind of stuff at a much, much faster pace, which is great, right? Which now means there are more goods available to people. It's not just for rich dudes and dudesses anymore. It's for everybody. Because there's so much more stuff now, there's so much more supply, we have lower prices. Now, the big question we'll look at this next week on our next set of videos, is going to be this. We see the economic changes for the countries, and oh my God, we're making money, right? All that kind of stuff. What the social impact is going to be. How is it going to impact how the people are seen and how people live in their factories? And how will this change the thoughts and minds of what's happening in Europe? That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very much for watching and playing along with us. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. Love you guys. Peace.